I raised a son who became a millionaire. But when I needed $70,000 to stay alive, he chose his wife's birthday party over my life. So I mortgaged my house, fought cancer alone, and built an empire from dirt. 6 years later, he came crawling back and I made him kneel in my field to beg for mercy. The smell of disinfectant was sharp metallic and clean, too clean for bad news. Eleanor Davis sat on the edge of the hospital bed, her gardening gloves still tucked into her purse, dirt under her fingernails, like a secret from another world. Dr. Patel's lips moved, but only a few words pierced through the fog, aggressive, not covered. $70,000. $70,000 for another spring. Outside, the rain began to fall, thin, hesitant drops, sliding down the glass like the start of a storm that didn't know if it wanted to arrive. Eleanor stared at them and whispered, "That's about the price of a small tractor." The doctor didn't laugh. Hours later, she drove her old pickup through the wine valleys of Napa, past rows of perfect vines she'd once helped plant for others. Every mile hurt. Every mile was memory. Her son's glass tower glistened on the horizon like something built to keep the world out. When she stepped inside, the marble floor swallowed the sound of her boots. Jason looked up from his laptop, his suit charcoal black, his tie immaculate. "Mom, you should have called." She handed him the medical file, trembling hands, shaking hope. "I need $70,000, she said simply. "Or 3 months?" Jason's eyes flicked between the papers and his monitor. "That's a lot, Mom. Amanda and I are balancing things." Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that had kept her alive through drought storms and betrayals of nature itself. "I watered you, Jason." "Every single day," she said softly. "Now I just need 1 cup back." The silence that followed was heavier than soil after rain. The elevator opened into a private world of glass and silver. The penthouse smelled of imported candles and new money eucalyptus and control. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her thrift store coat dripping rain onto marble that looked allergic to imperfection. Amanda appeared first heels, clicking like punctuation marks. "Eleanor, you didn't call ahead." Her voice carried the warmth of an air-conditioned lobby. "I didn't know cancer required an appointment," Eleanor said, setting her damp purse on a couch, worth more than her truck. Jason came out of his home office, eyes darting between his mother and the glowing stock tickers behind her. "You should have told me sooner, Mom. I didn't want to be another line in your spreadsheet," she said gently. He sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair. "It's just, we're leveraged right now. The fund, the house, Amanda's student loans," Amanda cut in, "and the new Tesla's deposit is non-refundable." That was the moment something in Eleanor's chest, not the cancer, cracked. She looked around at the skyline framed behind them, towers of light piercing the clouds, each window worth 1,000 lives. "I raised you to grow," she whispered, "not to calculate." Jason's voice softened, almost pleading. "Mom, we can talk to your doctor. Maybe there's a payment plan." She held up her hand. "I'm not a bill, Jason. I'm your mother." The city thundered outside, lights flickering on the glass as if the storm wanted to listen. Amanda's phone buzzed. Jason checked his watch. Eleanor stood, her reflection layered over theirs in the window, one life fading, too busy to notice. "Don't worry," she said, buttoning her coat. "This is just another season. I've planted through worse." The next morning smelled like rain that never came. Eleanor parked her old pickup outside the First Valley Credit Union, the same bank where she'd opened Jason's first savings account 25 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her once she'd deposited his future here. Now she was withdrawing her own. The loan officer, a young woman with bright lipstick and tired eyes, looked up. "Mrs. Davis, you understand that mortgaging your property at your age is risky." Eleanor smiled faintly. "So is dying." The woman hesitated, then began typing. Keys clicked like raindrops on tin. Papers slid across the desk, each signature another piece of soil turning over her old life. One signature for the land, one for the house, one for the years that built them. Outside, thunder murmured a low growl across the valley. When Eleanor stepped back into the street, the check trembled in her hand like a seed in the wind. $70,000, not salvation, but a shovel. That night, she drove home and cleared her desk. The lamp's warm light revealed a small notebook marked Second Bloom, her handwriting careful stubborn. She drew Rose Plan's names of seedlings as though mapping a battlefield. The phone rang. It was Dr. Patel. We can start Monday. The therapy's experimental but promising. Good. Eleanor said, her voice steady. I'll bring cash. Dirt doesn't do credit. The doctor paused, almost smiling. That's quite a statement. Where I come from, doctor, we pay the earth before it pays us back. Montage 4 needles glinting under fluorescent light, hands sowing seeds into trays of black soil. The rhythmic click of infusion machines syncs with a garden sprinkler outside. Her body weakened. Her plants began to rise. Sometimes she'd wake up nauseous and drag herself outside just to feel the soil. The damp smell was medicine no doctor could prescribe. She whispered to the seedlings like children, "Grow faster before I can't." On the 6th week, she found a single green shoot pushing through cracked clay, crooked, fragile, alive. She touched it with trembling fingers and whispered, "See you and me both." That evening, lightning broke across the valley. Eleanor stood on her porch, the rain finally coming wild cleansing. Her headscarf clung to her skull. Water ran down her face like baptism. Behind her, the house was darker than ever, but the garden, the paper farm reborn into real earth, shimmered under each flash of lightning. She wasn't rich or safe or healed, but she was planted, and that for now was enough. Morning broke over the valley with a pale light that smelled faintly of mint and mud. The storm had rinsed away the dust, leaving the air sharp and alive. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt strong enough to walk without clutching the doorframe. The backyard looked like a battlefield turned sanctuary. Wet soil, toppled pots, seed trays half submerged. But life was everywhere. Tiny stems pushing through the dark, reaching for a sky still streaked with gray. Eleanor knelt, ignoring the ache in her knees. She pressed her fingers into the soil until it filled the cracks of her skin. The dirt didn't judge her weakness. It welcomed it. A voice startled her. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're Mrs. Davis, right?" She turned. A young woman stood by the fence backpack, slung over one shoulder, curls wild from the rain. "I'm Rosa Alvarez. I live down the road. I saw your stand at the farmer's market last week. Those heirloom tomatoes. They were unreal." Eleanor smiled, brushing soil from her palms. Those tomatoes barely survived the drought. Then they're survivors. Like you, maybe. The words caught Eleanor off guard, gentle, disarming. Rosa explained she'd studied agricultural science before quitting to care for her father. "I miss working the soil," she said quietly. "If you ever need help." Eleanor studied her earnest eyes, calloused hands that didn't belong to a stranger. "You work for money." Rosa shrugged, mostly for purpose. That earned a slow laugh from Eleanor. "You'll fit right in. Grab a shovel." They worked side by side through the morning. The rhythm was uneven, but comforting, one planting, one watering, both silent except for the hum of insects and the clink of metal against stone. At noon, Rosa looked up, wiping her brow. "What's this place called?" Eleanor stood surveying the patchwork of green and soil. The wind carried the scent of life, raw, defiant. "Second Bloom," she said, "for things that refuse to die." Rosa grinned. "Then let's make it grow." The sun came up gold and dusty over the Napa hills, the kind of light that made the world look forgiving even when it wasn't. Eleanor loaded her old pickup with baskets of vegetables, crooked carrots, patchy lettuce tomatoes, still warm from the soil. Each one had survived her hands, her chemo, her fear. At the farmer's market, her stall looked small between the artisan honey booth and the flower truck with its perfect pastel branding. Rosa helped set up a cardboard sign, hand-painted in shaky strokes. Second Bloom Homegrown Organic. By 9 a.m., customers were already moving in waves, but they moved around her, not to her. A woman in yoga pants picked up a tomato, frowned. $6 a pound. Whole Foods has them for $4. Eleanor smiled politely. Then maybe you should buy them there? The woman left. Rosa bit her lip. Maybe we should do a discount. Eleanor shook her head. Never lower the price of something that cost you everything. The day dragged. The sun grew hotter, pressing down like judgment. Rosa handed Eleanor a bottle of water. Maybe they don't trust us yet, she murmured. Eleanor glanced at the glossy banners of their competitors' pictures of smiling families, words like heritage and local love. She almost laughed. We don't need trust yet, she said. We need taste. By noon, they had sold 3 bunches of herbs and 2 tomatoes. The money box jingled like mockery. Rosa kicked at the dirt. You worked all week for this. Eleanor didn't answer. She looked at her rough hands, the faint tremor that never left since treatment. It's okay, she whispered. Even good soil needs seasons. As they packed up, a man approached, tall-bearded with the casual confidence of someone who knew good food when he smelled it. He picked up a tomato, rolled it in his hand, and bit into it without asking. Juice dripped down his chin. His eyes widened. My God, he said softly. This tastes like July when I was 10. He reached into his wallet. I own Harvest Table downtown. I want these on my menu. Same price. Maybe higher. Eleanor blinked. You're serious? He smiled. Dead serious. I've been chasing this flavor for years. Bring me 20 pounds next week. When he left, Rosa was speechless. Eleanor just laughed, low, tired, grateful. You see, Rosa. The right mouths find the right food. They stood in the fading light, their empty baskets glinting with the last sun. Around them, other vendors packed up unsold produce. But at the Second Bloom stall, every crate was empty. For the first time, in the best way. Jason Davis's world was measured in numbers, profits, projections, potential. His new startup, Agrimind, promised to redefine farming through AI-driven soil analytics. He stood before a glowing boardroom screen explaining algorithms that had never touched a single root. Traditional farming is inefficient, he said, pointer flicking across charts. We predict crop yield with 97% accuracy, 0 guesswork, 0 dirt. Applause rippled through the glass room. Investors smiled. Cameras flashed. Jason smiled back the same practiced grin that never reached his eyes. That evening, as he drove home in his Tesla, his phone buzzed with a notification. Harvest Table had posted on social media, now featuring produce from Second Bloom Farm. Taste the difference authenticity makes. He frowned. Second Bloom. The name tugged at something half forgotten. He scrolled through the photos, close-ups of vegetables, all imperfect and glowing with real color. One photo showed Eleanor's hands weathered strong, holding a single tomato. The caption read, "Grown with care, not code." Jason stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a forced laugh, he forwarded the post to Amanda. Jason, look, Mom's hobby farm is trending. Guess even dirt can go viral. Amanda's sweet. Maybe she'll get a sponsor deal. He looked out the window at the freeway lights, the sterile glow of the city. In his head, numbers recalculated yield, marketability, scalability. Could her little farm be leveraged? Meanwhile, miles away, Eleanor stood in her field under starlight. She and Rosa were checking irrigation lines by flashlight. Earthworms wriggled in the damp soil, invisible workers unpaid and perfect. Rosa smiled. You ever think machines will do this better? Eleanor pressed her foot into the dirt, feeling it breathe. When they can bleed, she said quietly, then maybe. The wind stirred the vines soft and knowing. Somewhere across town, Jason refreshed his dashboard and watched a graph-spike digital proof of success. Neither noticed how different kinds of growth looked in the dark. The summer came dry and merciless. The valley's once green hills turned the color of bone. Cracks spread through the soil like unanswered prayers. Eleanor's small farm wilted under the heat. Leaves curled, stems drooped, and hope shrank with the water barrels. Every day she checked the sky, waiting for clouds that never came. Rosa kicked at the dust. If this keeps up, we'll lose half the crop. Eleanor shaded her eyes. We won't lose anything we haven't fought for. Rosa exhaled, frustrated. Faith doesn't irrigate fields. Eleanor smiled faintly. Then we'll build something that does. That night, they stayed up under a buzzing lantern sketching plans on torn paper feed sacks, a drip irrigation system made from salvaged tubing and reused soda bottles. Rosa called it Frankenstein plumbing. Eleanor called it salvation with duct tape. The next morning, they dug trenches until their palms blistered. Rosa drilled holes. Eleanor mixed compost tea that smelled worse than death and life combined. They laughed through the stench. By dusk, the system sputtered to life, water beads sliding down thin hoses, feeding the soil drop by drop. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Rosa cheered. Look, it's working. Eleanor knelt beside the rows, watching the thirsty earth drink. Mua qua minjai, she whispered under her breath. Our own rain. Days passed. Shoots lifted again. The lettuce glistened in the morning light. Tiny miracles wearing crowns of dew. The smell of damp soil returned, thick, sweet, forgiving. At the market, the chef from Harvest Table ordered double. Another restaurant called. Word spread quietly. Second Bloom Produce stays fresh longer. Rosa waved the new invoice. We're officially profitable. Eleanor laughed softly, her face lined with sun and relief. Careful, child. Profit can make people forget why they started. Rosa tilted her head. And you, Eleanor, wiped dirt from her nails. I started because I was dying, she said simply. Now I grow to live. Overhead, a few clouds gathered at last, thin and uncertain, but enough to make the air smell like promise. By late September, the valley softened again. The mornings smelled like mint and sunlight. The vines shimmered gold in the distance. At Second Bloom, rows of kale and heirloom tomatoes rose proud, and even the drip lines humming like veins under the soil. Eleanor watched Rosa harvest with the precision of a jeweler. Handle them like promises, she said, placing each tomato into a basket lined with old newspapers. Rosa grinned. If promises were this fragile, people would keep them. They loaded the truck and drove to Harvest Table, where the head chef, Marco Reyes, waited by the back entrance. His white apron was stained with olive oil and victory. He sliced into a tomato right there on the loading dock, tasted it raw, then closed his eyes. This, he said, slowly tastes like it still remembers the rain. Eleanor smiled, quiet and proud. It does. We made our own. Marco wiped his hands. I'm putting this on the menu. I'll tag your farm. Real names, real people, customers love that. Within a week, Harvest Table's new dish, Second Bloom Salad, was everywhere. Online reviews, food blogs, glossy magazine photos of crimson tomatoes under drizzles of balsamic light. Orders poured in. Rosa barely kept up with packaging. Eleanor stayed up late, labeling crates by hand. Every box carried the same message written in her careful script, grown with hope, sold with honesty. By the end of the month, they'd cleared every debt on the books. Rosa danced barefoot in the barn, waving the last invoice like a flag. We did it. We're officially in the black. Eleanor chuckled, sipping tea from a chipped mug. Careful. Black ink can still stain. She walked outside, looking at the horizon. The city lights glittered faintly, Jason's world metallic and far. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Harvest Table tagged you in a post. A photo of Marco raising a glass. Caption to the women who grow miracles. Eleanor's eyes blurred. She set the phone down on the porch railing, where the reflection of starlight shimmered over the cracked screen. You hear that she said to the wind, half a whisper to the garden. They're calling us miracles, old girl. Rosa leaned on the doorframe, wiping dirt from her cheek. Maybe we are. Eleanor turned, smiling through tears. No, we're just proof that pain can grow flavor. The camera pulls back the farm, glowing in moonlight irrigation, dripping like heartbeat rhythms the city, a faint constellation beyond the hills. From this quiet distance, triumph didn't shout. It breathed. The paper smelled faintly of ink and citrus disinfectant, like every deal Eleanor had ever feared. She sat across from Marco Reyes and the restaurant group's attorney at a long oak table. The sun through the skylight drew stripes across the contracts. Here the lawyer said, tapping the final page. Annual supply agreement, 5 restaurants. Fixed rate per crate. You'll need consistent yield and delivery every Monday. Eleanor's hand hovered over the pen. Her nails were chipped, lined with dirt from that morning's harvest. I've never signed anything that used this much paper to talk about vegetables, she said dryly. Marco smiled. It's not just vegetables anymore, Mrs. Davis. It's reputation. Rosa stood behind her, bouncing slightly on her heels, equal parts excitement and anxiety. We can do it, she whispered. We'll expand the back plot. Add more drip lines. Eleanor looked out the window. The light poured over her hands, pale and warm. It reminded her of mornings in the garden, real contracts written by rain and patience. All right, she said softly, signing her name. Let's feed the valley. Back at Second Bloom, Rosa whooped, spinning in the dirt. We're official suppliers. Eleanor tucked the signed copy into a drawer beside her seed catalogs. Official means accountable, she said. Every Monday from now on, no excuses. Soil doesn't care about paperwork, but chefs do. They expanded the field that weekend, planting more rows, marking each with wooden stakes, painted the color of sunrise. Eleanor moved slower now. The treatments had left her bones thin and her breath shorter. Rosa noticed but didn't mention it. She just worked beside her, silently mirroring each motion. When they finished, the sun was low amber through the trees, soft against the new irrigation lines. Rosa looked up. Feels like the light's signing its own contract. Eleanor smiled, brushing soil from her palms. It always does, she said. We just have to keep our end. The camera pulls wide, the field glowing under the last sunlight. The first real chapter of Second Bloom sealed not with ink, but with sweat and promise. The night of the gala shimmered like money pretending to be magic. Inside the Solara Grand Hotel, chandeliers bled gold over marble, and Jason Davis smiled for cameras he no longer saw. His face was everywhere, on banners, on screens, in the glossy eyes of investors shaking his hand. Amanda sparkled beside him, wrapped in silver sequins and champagne laughter. Tonight, Jason said from the stage, his voice smooth as poured wine, Agrimind celebrates innovation, the future of sustainable food. The crowd applauded. Glasses clinked. A live band swelled. Outside the city, miles away, the real version of sustainable bent her back under floodlights. Eleanor and Rosa were harvesting late for the new Monday delivery. The air was cold enough to sting, the soil damp from last night's mist. Their hands moved fast, almost rhythmic, clip, twist, pack, lift. In Jason's world, waiters carried trays of locally sourced dishes. Second Bloom greens dressed with vinaigrette, the same lettuce Eleanor had washed in a metal basin that morning. Nobody knew her name. Amanda laughed, swirling her wine. Your supply chain tastes amazing, baby. You're feeding the elite. Jason grinned, and making a fortune doing it. Somewhere between applause and flashbulbs, he believed it. Meanwhile, Eleanor sealed another crate, fingers shaking from cold and fatigue. "That's the last one," Rosa said, wiping her brow. "We did it." Eleanor straightened slowly, her back cracking like old branches. The moonlight hit her face, pale and strong. "No," she said, "we earned it." She looked up at the stars. Somewhere beyond those clouds, her son was speaking about feeding the world while she was out here doing it. At the gala, Jason's speech hit its crescendo. "The future doesn't grow in dirt," he declared, smiling, as if quoting Revelation. "It grows in data." The audience cheered. The screen behind him flashed with AgriMind's logo, a digital leaf, perfect and sterile. Eleanor knelt again, scooping a handful of soil, crumbling it between her fingers. It stuck under her nails, stubborn and real. Rosa called out, "You okay?" Eleanor nodded. "Just listening to the earth. It doesn't clap, but it remembers." At that exact moment inside the ballroom, Jason raised his glass. "To progress," he said. Eleanor lifted her basket. "To persistence," she whispered. The film of the night could have run in 2 frames, one gilded, one grounded. Champagne spilling like liquid applause. Irrigation dripping steady as heartbeat. In one world, light reflected off crystal. In the other, it lived on leaves. When Jason's speech ended, the crowd stood and roared approval. He felt taller, wealthier, immortal. He didn't see Amanda's eyes drift toward the mayor's aide. He didn't hear his conscience, too faint beneath applause. Back at Second Bloom, Eleanor locked the barn door and leaned against it, exhausted. Her phone buzzed. A tag, AgriMind Gala, celebrating the future of farming. She watched a short clip, Jason smiling, his voice clear through the music. "The soil of tomorrow is silicon." Her lips trembled, not from sadness, but from something sharper. "He's forgotten the taste," she murmured. Rosa stepped closer. Taste of what? Eleanor smiled faintly. Rain. Real rain. She turned off the light. In the darkness, the crops shimmered under moonlight, their roots deep, their leaves trembling in a wind the gala would never feel. Somewhere in the city, applause faded. In the valley, the earth exhaled. And between them, silence rich and alive, binding mother and son, like 2 sides of a seed. The morning fog was too thick, the air too still. Eleanor felt it the moment she stepped into the rows, something wrong in the rhythm of the field. The lettuce leaves that should have been firm and wet with dew hung limp and gray. When she lifted one, the smell hit, sour, sweet, and rotten. Rosa came running from the next plot. "It's spreading," she said, panic sharp in her voice. "Half the kale beds look." Eleanor knelt, fingers sinking into the soil. The roots slipped free like wet thread. Root rot. Her heart sank. One bad shipment could destroy every contract they'd just signed. "Pull everything that's soft," Eleanor ordered. "Don't wait. Burn it." "But that's a week's harvest. Then we lose a week, not a reputation." They worked without talking, the sound of ripping leaves and crackling fire filling the valley. Smoke rose blue and bitter. Eleanor's scarf smelled of ashes by noon. At the restaurant, Chef Marco called 3 times before she finally picked up. "Eleanor, what's going on?" "My delivery's late." "There won't be one today," she said, steady but heavy. "I can get from another supplier." "Then do it." She cut in. "But don't tell them my name." Silence. Then quietly he said, "That's what makes you different." When the fire died, the field looked wounded, black patches like scars across the green. Rosa dropped to the ground, covering her face. "We worked so hard." Eleanor knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Every garden has its funeral," she said softly. "That's how it learns to live." That night, she walked alone through the ashes. The moonlight caught on the charred stems silver ghosts against the dirt. Her phone buzzed another notification from Jason's World Agrimind stock surges after new investor round. She stared at the headline, thumb hovering, then shut the screen. Let them chase their numbers, she whispered into the dark. I'll keep chasing roots. The wind carried the scent of burned earth. Somewhere beneath it, life was already starting again. 3 days after the fire, the valley smelled like smoke and silence. The blackened rows looked like graves. But Eleanor knew better. The ground never truly dies. It only waits. She walked the perimeter notebook in hand, marking what survived. A few beds of herbs clung stubbornly to life-green flecks against gray soil. Rosa followed quietly, her camera slung over her shoulder. Maybe we should close for a while, Rosa murmured. Take a break. Heal. Eleanor shook her head. The land doesn't stop breathing. Neither do we. Rosa hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I've been thinking, she said. People love our story. What if we teach them how to grow even a little, not farming exactly, living with dirt, workshops, soil care, composting? City folks would pay to touch real ground. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. People will pay to sweat, they already pay to suffer at gyms, Rosa said, grinning faintly. At least ours smells better. Eleanor laughed, the first real sound of joy since the fire. You're serious? Rosa nodded. We call it the soil bank. You don't deposit money, you deposit patience. You leave richer. The name hung in the air like sunlight breaking through cloud. By the next weekend, a handful of locals showed up. Families, students, retirees with soft hands and curious eyes. Eleanor taught them how to feel soil texture, how to tell sand from silt, life from dust. Rosa filmed short clips for social media. Within days, their first video went viral. The woman who healed cancer and soil. More visitors came. They paid small fees, brought lunch, stayed to listen. They planted seedlings and signed their names on wooden tags, not customers, but contributors. One afternoon, a little girl dug up an earthworm and squealed. It's slimy. Eleanor smiled. That's the sound of the earth laughing. By evening, the field no longer looked dead. Rows of footprints crossed the ash, the first green shoots peeking through like forgiveness. Rosa checked her ledger, astonished. You know this covers next month's bills. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. So the soil's paying us back. Rosa laughed. Told you. The soil bank. Eleanor gazed over the valley, the wind carrying faint music from the town below. The fields whispered quietly behind her, not of loss, but of renewal. Let them have their data, she said. We have deposits that grow roots. In the city, Amanda Davis was reinventing herself again. Her last lifestyle post, farm chic dining. Bringing the countryside to the city had gone viral. She didn't mention whose countryside it was. A professional team had transformed her penthouse into a modern, rustic experience. Burlap table runners, fake ivy vines, baskets of decorative wheat. Every photo looked golden, filtered, perfect. She stood before the camera in a white linen dress, holding a glass of organic wine she'd never tasted twice. Try tilting the head a little, the photographer said. Think natural. Amanda smiled, teeth flawless. Natural's easy, she said. You just have to plan it. Behind her, Jason scrolled through numbers on his tablet. The Agrimind Fund had grown again, new investors, new patents, and a new branding campaign using phrases like rooted in technology and digitally sustainable. He didn't notice that every word sounded more like his mother's than his own. Amanda walked over, kissing him lightly on the cheek. You know, she said, you should partner with someone like that Second Bloom farm everyone's raving about. It'll make your tech look more authentic. Jason smirked. We're authentic enough. She shrugged, already turning back to her mirror. Just saying, people love a rustic face behind a corporate dream. Later that evening, their dinner guests admired her setup. "It feels so earthy," one said, "like we're dining in the vineyards." Amanda lifted her glass. "That's the goal, the illusion of effort." Across the valley, the real effort glowed under moonlight. Eleanor and Rosa finishing another workshop, hands stained with compost, laughter echoing through the field. They sat on overturned crates, eating roasted vegetables from their own harvest. "Someday," Rosa said, smiling, "they'll make this trend." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "They already are. Only theirs comes with hashtags." The camera would pan upward. One dinner table dressed in burlap and lies. One field dressed in sweat and truth. Two worlds lit by candles and stars, both chasing beauty, but only one truly growing it. The crash didn't start with headlines. It started with silence. Jason Davis sat in his office tower long after the others had gone home. The city below was a glittering circuit board, every light a promise that looked solid until morning. His monitor blinked red downgrades, liquidity warning, margin call pending. He stared at the words numb. The graphs were collapsing faster than his breath could keep up. Agrimind's predictive model had failed. The algorithm, once hailed as revolutionary, hadn't accounted for a 3-week drought that scorched partner farms across California. The data said the crops would survive. The ground disagreed. Now, investors were demanding their returns. The funds leveraged the same brilliance he'd bragged about, had turned into a noose. Jason typed frantically, calling analysts. Refreshing dashboards, whispering the same lie. It's temporary, but the markets don't forgive prayer. Amanda burst into the office phone, in hand, eyes wide. "Jason, CNBC is calling it a correction. They're saying you misreported sustainability metrics." He turned pale. "We didn't misreport. We optimized the truth." She stared. "They're showing drone footage, empty fields. Dead ground." Jason froze. The footage played silently on her phone, dry soil, cracking like broken glass, the same AI logo overlay, blinking Agrimind Pilot Site 7. The reporters called it a collapse of credibility. The investors called it fraud. His inbox flooded with withdrawal notices, lawsuits, board members resigning. When the first news alert hit, Agrimind stock falls. 62% in one day. He slumped into his chair, the sound of the city suddenly too loud, too alive. Amanda's voice shook. "We'll lose everything." Jason looked out the window. In the distance, far beyond the skyscrapers, the valley shimmered faintly under morning light. "His mother's valley," he whispered. "Not everything." At second bloom, the same sunlight broke through the mist, soft and honest. Rosa was teaching a group of children how to transplant seedlings. Their laughter filled the field. Eleanor checked her phone, news notifications everywhere. Jason Davis, CEO of Agrimind, faces investigation for data manipulation. She stared for a long time, unreadable. Rosa saw her expression. "You okay?" Eleanor pocketed the phone. "He's learning what happens when you plant lies." "Will you call him?" Eleanor shook her head. "Seeds don't listen until they crack." That night, Jason sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by screens gone black. Amanda had left for her sisters for a few days. The wine glass on the counter still smelled of her lipstick. Rain started against the window, slow, uncertain. He stood there watching it, the sound foreign, after years of filtered air and bottled water. When the thunder rolled, it hit like memory, the sound of childhood storms, of running through mud behind a woman's voice calling his name. For the first time in years, he whispered it back. "Mom." The next morning, he opened his email again, scrolling through the wreckage, lawsuits, foreclosure warnings, frozen accounts. Buried among them, one line from his assistant supply chain note. "Our produce contracts trace back to a small provider." Second bloom. Jason stopped breathing. The name hit like lightning. He whispered it aloud, almost reverently. Second bloom. He closed his eyes. The image of his mother's hands came back, the same hands he'd once refused to help. Now, they were the only hands holding what was left of him. Jason parked at the edge of the valley just before dusk. His Tesla looked absurd against the dirt road, a silver ghost lost in a world that smelled of rain and roots. He hadn't been here in years, not since the day he told his mother, "That's a lot of money, Mom." The words echoed now like a curse. He followed the hand-painted signs that led him down a gravel path. Second Bloom Farm Workshops. Saturday fresh produce daily. Children were leaving with baskets of greens, their laughter carrying through the fog. Jason walked slower, eyes scanning every corner as if stepping into a dream he didn't deserve. And then he saw her. Eleanor stood near the greenhouse, tying bundles of herbs with twine. Her scarf was faded, her posture straight, her face older, but unmistakably her. The evening light brushed her in gold. For a long time he couldn't speak. His voice came out small, cracked. "Mom." She turned, eyes steady, hands never stopping. "Jason." It wasn't surprise. It was recognition, as if she'd been expecting this storm to find her. He took a step closer. "You own this place, I built it," she said. "With the money I didn't have and the time you didn't give me." He flinched. "Mom, I didn't know, you didn't ask." Her tone wasn't cruel, just final. The air between them smelled of mint and smoke, like old forgiveness drying in the sun. Jason looked around the neat rows, the handmade signs, the faces of workers who smiled at her like family. "Second Bloom," he murmured. "You're the supplier." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. "The same supplier your fund exploited for press releases. You called it innovation." He tried to meet her gaze, but it broke him. I'm ruined, Mom. Everything's gone." She looked at him the way she once looked at dying plants, measuring whether something could still be saved. "Not everything," she said quietly. "You still have dirt. You just forgot how to use it." Jason swallowed hard, the last light fading behind him. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of soil under his shoes and realized it had been waiting for him all along. The next morning smelled of damp straw and brewed coffee. The farm was quiet, except for the rustle of wind in the kale beds. Jason hadn't slept. He sat at the old picnic table outside the barn, eyes hollow, shirt, wrinkled tie gone. He looked like a man stripped of all the layers that once made him important. Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee and set one before him. "Black," she said. "Like you used to hate." He gave a tired laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I've learned to swallow things that taste worse." They sat in silence. A rooster crowed somewhere in the distance. Finally, Jason spoke. "Mom, I need help." She didn't answer, only sipped her coffee. The sound of the windmill filled the pause. "I've lost the fund," he continued. "Investors are suing. The bank froze my accounts. I don't even have the money to pay my lawyers." Eleanor stared out at the field. "And you came here because Jason swallowed? Because you're the only person I know who still believes in me?" Her eyes flicked toward him, calm but cutting. "I believed in who you were? I'm not sure who you've become." He leaned forward, desperate. "Mom, please. I'm drowning. If you could just loan me." She raised a hand. "Don't say a number. You'll make it sound like a transaction again." Jason froze. The breeze lifted the edge of his shirt. The smell of mint filled the air. "I know I hurt you," he said. "I was stupid. I thought success meant being untouchable. But when everything fell apart, all I could think about was you. How you faced death alone. How you still built this." Eleanor folded her hands. "I didn't build it alone. The earth helped. The people helped. Even the pain helped. You weren't there." "I know," he said, voice trembling. "That's why I'm here now. To make it right." She looked at him for a long time, the sun she'd once carried through storms now hollowed by his own. And what does right mean to you, Jason? He hesitated. Maybe redemption. Her gaze softened, almost pitying. Redemption isn't borrowed, son. It's planted. Jason's hands shook. Then teach me how. Eleanor studied him carefully, the undone cufflinks, the callus-free fingers that had only ever touched screens. You'd have to start where I did. He frowned. Where's that? She nodded toward the field. On your knees in the dirt. He looked out at the rows of soil stretching toward the hills. You mean actually farm? I mean actually live, she said. Jason's throat tightened. I'll do anything, Mom. Just, please. Tell me you don't hate me. Eleanor looked down at her cup, then back at him. Hate wastes the heart. I used mine to grow things. A tear slipped down Jason's face. He tried to hide it, but she saw. She always saw. Help me, he whispered. I don't want money. I just want a chance. Eleanor stood slowly, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked over the valley, her kingdom of soil and sweat. When she spoke, her voice carried the strength of wind through vines. Then you'll start tomorrow, she said. No titles, no excuses, just work. Jason nodded, voice breaking. Yes, ma'am. She turned toward him. And Jason. He looked up. Don't call it work, call it repayment. The camera lingers on his face, humbled, terrified, and maybe finally human. The windmill creaks. The sunlight flickers across the valley, and for the first time in years, a mother and son breathe the same air again. The next day dawned gray, heavy, with the promise of rain. Jason stood by the barn sleeves rolled up for the first time in years, mud already streaking the knees of his jeans. Rosa handed him a pair of gloves. You sure about this, boss? She teased gently. He shook his head. Not boss. Just Jason. From the porch, Eleanor watched them. For hours, she said nothing, only observed how he stumbled over roots, how he cursed the stubborn soil, how he tried again anyway. There was something almost holy in the clumsiness. When the sky finally cracked open and rain began to fall, Eleanor called out, Enough for today. Jason followed her inside, dripping water on the old wooden floor. She poured him tea, then laid a folder on the table between them. Cream-colored paper bound with twine. He frowned. What's this, your contract? She said. He blinked. You're hiring me? Eleanor smiled faintly. Not hiring, redeeming. You once built contracts that traded lives for profit. This one trades pride for mercy. He opened the folder. Inside, 3 handwritten clauses, neat and deliberate. She began to read them aloud. 1. You will serve as field manager for 12 months full-time with no salary above a farmhand's. You'll earn your meals, not buy them. Jason nodded slowly. Fair. 2. Your company's apology letter for false sustainability claims will be published under your name and distributed to every client. He hesitated. That'll end my career. Eleanor met his eyes. No, son. It'll start your integrity. He swallowed. And the 3rd. Her voice softened, almost breaking. 3. You will fund a program called Mother's Acres Community Land for women who lost everything but courage. 5 years, 10% of all profit you ever make again. Jason looked down at the paper. The ink was already smudged from the rain dripping off his sleeve. You really wrote this like a contract. I had to, she said. You only ever listened to paperwork. He smiled faintly through tears. And if I sign? Then the land forgives you, she said. And maybe one day I will too. Thunder rolled outside, shaking the windows. Jason picked up the pen, hesitated, then pressed it to the page. The ink bled slightly into the damp paper, like roots finding soil. When it was done, Eleanor reached out and covered his hand. That's not a signature, Jason. That's a seed." He nodded, unable to speak. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof like applause from the sky. She poured him another cup of tea. "Contracts are strange things," she said quietly. "They make people think they own what they sign. But this one owns you until you learn what giving really means." Jason looked out at the soaked fields, then back at her. "When does it start?" Eleanor smiled. "It already has." Lightning flashed. The farmhouse filled with light, their silhouettes frozen for a heartbeat. Mother and son divided once by money, now bound by mud and mercy. Outside, the water pooled at the edge of the fields, seeping into the blackened patches where old crops had died. In the morning, something new would rise there. The sun returned timidly the next morning, pale and forgiving. The earth still breathed steam after the storm. Jason walked barefoot into the field, the soil soft beneath his feet, cold, alive, and real. Rosa handed him a trowel and pointed toward a row half dug. "You missed a few," she said, teasing. Jason crouched, pressing his palms into the mud, his fingernails filled with dirt almost instantly. The first sting of blisters surprised him. He'd never realized work could hurt, honestly. Eleanor watched from the porch, a mug of coffee in her hands, face unreadable. Rosa guided him with the patience of the land itself. "Don't fight it," she said. "The soil listens when you stop trying to control it." Jason nodded, sweat dripping down his temple. He drove the trowel deeper. Turned, the earth felt it give way, not to power, but to rhythm. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat matched the pull of roots and wind. By noon, his shirt clung to him, soaked in effort. He wiped his face with a muddy sleeve and looked up. Eleanor was beside him now, silent. For a moment, neither spoke. "I used to think money made people stand taller," Jason said quietly. "But out here, you have to kneel to get anything done." Eleanor smiled faintly. "The soil only feeds the humble." He stared at the horizon, the endless rows, the slow sway of crops under sun. "It's strange," he whispered. "When I was rich, I couldn't breathe. Now I'm broke and covered in mud, and I feel alive." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's because this is what breathing sounds like." They worked until sunset. Jason's hands trembled. His back screamed, but his eyes were clear. Not the dull glass of boardrooms, but the raw shine of someone relearning humanity. As they finished, Rosa laughed, tossing him a carrot just pulled from the ground. "Congratulations," she said. "You finally earned lunch." Jason bit into it without washing the dirt off. The taste was sharp, sweet, unforgettable. He smiled. "I didn't know the earth could forgive." Eleanor looked toward the sky where the first stars blinked awake. "It doesn't forgive," she said softly. "It just gives you another chance to kneel." By October 2nd, Bloom glowed like a painting. The fields shimmered amber beneath the late sun, and the air was heavy with the scent of basil and roasted corn. Eleanor stood by the barn gate watching people arrive, families, neighbors, even former workshop students carrying baskets of homemade bread and jars of honey. Rosa had strung fairy lights across the trees. They swayed gently in the breeze like fireflies pretending to stay. "Looks like the whole valley showed up," Rosa said, grinning as she ladled cider into paper cups. "They came for the harvest." Eleanor said, her smile slow. "But maybe they'll stay for the peace." Jason was setting up the tables, long planks, balanced on wine barrels covered with checkered cloth. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hands still bandaged from pruning. When he looked up and saw his mother watching, he gave her a shy, boyish nod, a language older than words. As dusk fell, someone began to play guitar. The sound was small at first, then gathered courage as voices joined soft harmonies of people who didn't know each other well, but sang as if they did. Children chased each other between hay bales. Rosa danced barefoot with a teenager who'd been her first student. Laughter blended with the music, warm and full, the kind that fills the gaps silence once owned. Eleanor sat down beside Jason, a bowl of roasted vegetables between them. "You learned to grow," she said. "Now learn to rest." He chuckled. "I thought rest was for the rich. It's for the rooted," she replied. Amanda appeared near the edge of the crowd, her city dress too crisp for the dirt. For a moment she hesitated, then stepped forward, clutching a pie awkwardly wrapped in foil. Jason saw her and stood. Their eyes met, not anger, not longing, just two people recognizing what ambition had cost them. He took the pie, nodded gently. "You made this." Amanda smiled, small and human. "Store-bought crust. But the berries are real." He laughed softly. "That's a start." As the night deepened, lanterns flickered, and the laughter of the valley folded around them all, like a blanket. For the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel alone in her season. The harvest was more than food, now it was forgiveness. The press conference was held in the old town hall, not in glass, not in chrome, but under wooden beams that had seen real weather. Rows of reporters filled the room. Cameras poised the air, thick with expectation. Jason stood at the podium wearing no tie, no mask of power, just a white shirt rolled at the sleeves and eyes that had finally stopped hiding. Behind him, a simple banner read, "Rebuilding from the Roots." Eleanor watched from the last row, Rosa beside her. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply listened to her son finding his voice again. Jason cleared his throat. "For years," he began, "I sold a dream of growth that wasn't real. I called it innovation. I called it efficiency. But what it really was distance. Distance from the soil, from truth, from people like my mother, who taught me that you can't grow anything without getting your hands dirty." The flashbulbs flickered, but he didn't flinch. "I falsified data. I let greed sound like progress, and when it all collapsed, the only thing left standing was the ground I'd once walked away from." He paused, the silence, weighty, almost holy. "So today, I'm giving what I can back. My company will fund Mother's Acres 5 years, 10% of every profit we ever earn again. Land for women who have nothing left but the will to plant again." A murmur spread through the room. Some skeptical, some moved. Jason lifted a small envelope. "This is my first contribution. It's not charity. It's repayment." Applause began hesitant at first, then stronger, rising like wind through trees. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Rosa clapped beside her, eyes shining. When it ended, Jason stepped down, walking straight to where his mother sat. He didn't speak. He simply handed her the envelope the same way she once handed him his future in a hospital file. Eleanor took it, met his eyes, and whispered, "Now you're starting to grow for real." Outside, the crowd followed them into sunlight. Cameras flashed, but the image that lingered wasn't spectacle. It was soil on Jason's hands, glinting like gold. Spring returned like forgiveness. The valley shimmered again, greener, fuller, alive, in a way it hadn't been for years. Dew hung on the leaves like small promises keeping their word. At second bloom, the fields were busy. New volunteers tilled the soil. Children painted signs for the Mother's Acres plots, and laughter drifted over the hills like wind carrying music. Eleanor stood at the gate, her scarf fluttering in the morning breeze. Her hands, still calloused and steady, rested on the fence as she watched Jason teaching a group of women how to transplant seedlings. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way someone does when they've learned that gentleness grows faster than pride. "Hold the roots like you'd hold a heartbeat," he said softly. The women smiled. Even the earth seemed to listen. Rosa walked up beside Eleanor, wiping soil from her palms. "You think he'll stay this time?" Eleanor's gaze stayed on her son. "He's not staying," she said. "He's belonging." A pause. Birds burst from a fig tree, scattering sunlight in their wings. Funny, Rosa said. A year ago, this place was ashes. Eleanor smiled. Everything worth growing starts in ashes. They turned as a group of kids ran up, waving something shiny, a plaque. Mother's Acres Community Garden founded by Second Bloom. Jason walked over dirt still on his hands, and together they nailed the plaque to a post near the gate. He stepped back beside his mother, both of them silent for a while. "It's beautiful," he said finally. "It's yours too," she replied. "Not the land, the lesson." He looked at her eyes soft. "You think it'll last?" Eleanor's smile deepened. "As long as someone remembers to kneel." A gust of wind rolled through the rows, bending the crops in a single wave, green, endless, forgiving. The sun broke through the clouds, flooding the valley in light. Eleanor reached down, scooped a handful of soil, let it slip through her fingers. "Second bloom," she whispered, almost to the earth itself. Second chance. And as the camera pulled wide, the fields, the laughter. The wind, it was clear the season had kept its promise. Everything that had once died had learned how to live again. How did this story touch you? Tell us in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the so you won't miss our next emotional story. And before you go, click on the end screen to discover more powerful, heartwarming tales waiting just for you. See you in the next story.